Welcome to the Your Courageous Life podcast, where we discuss psychology and tools to help you create better habits, cultivate discipline, and live with courage, aka grit and emotional resilience. I'm your host, Kate Swoboda. Learn more about my books and get additional resources at yourcourageouslife.com. And now, here's today's episode. Hey, everybody. Got a big one for you today. Big. How to improve communication in relationships. Oh, I have so many things to say about this, and I just want to say at the outset that this is a tender topic for me. And why is that? Because I know that any relationship I've ever had, friendship, work relationship, dating, family, being married now, being a parent, any relationship where things were not working so well, the issue was almost certainly tied to communication. Like that's at the heart of it. So I'm going to get into some of the things I've learned, unfortunately, the hard way, painful way, the 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of way. And hopefully in sharing what I've learned, it helps you in some of those relationships as well. I want to put the disclaimer on today's episode that for all the communication work I'm talking about today, I'm referring to relationships with people that you want to heal or sustain, relationships where you can generally trust that they care about you, that they also care about the relationship, they want things to get better. And that's important because, communication with people who actively dislike you, who are committed to being offended by anything you say, who just want to argue, who get in pot shots, who yell at you, who curse at you, that's a whole other set of communication strategies. So today I'm focusing on the relationships that you're wanting to improve, heal, and where you know that generally the other person wants the same thing. Now, the other person might be hurt right now. Maybe there's conflict between you, things like that. But even in that hurt, you have a general sense of trust that the other person wants the same. So I mentioned that, talking about communication in relationships, it's a tender topic. And I think the reason it's a tender topic is because what's hard is how easily in a relationship you can be misunderstood. It's painful, or at least I find it painful to be misunderstood. I've met people who do not care if they are misunderstood. They're really rock stars at if somebody else misunderstands me, they totally have the ability to ask me clarifying questions so that I can clear up the misunderstanding. And if they aren't going to do that, then I know something about them and me in relationship, and I'm centered and settled and good with that. And I'm like, when I talk to those people, I always feel a little bit like, damn, all right, there we go. I aspire to that. But I still do find it painful to be misunderstood, to really, really have wanted to communicate something solution-seeking, something that's going to make things better, but the other person took it differently than I'd hoped. That's hard. And one thing that I want to start off with today, which is really going to end up being the first thing that I'm going to say, is something I've learned about how to improve communication in relationships, because this has taken me decades. I'm in my 40s, did not know this until this year. This pattern. I'm going to start there because it was such an aha moment. Here's the pattern, okay? Because I've been misunderstood in the past, and it's painful to be misunderstood, unintentionally and unconsciously, I had started over-explaining my perspective to someone if I sensed any kind of conflict, any possibility that they might be upset with me. So this is a pattern I'm unhooking from, a pattern of over-explaining out of a fear of being misunderstood. So I'm fearing being misunderstood. I don't want that to happen again. So unintentionally, I start over-explaining, okay? I would go into all of my intentions. I'd go into what I was trying to do. I'd explain where I thought the situation had gotten off track, why I thought it had gotten off track. And my hope in explaining all of that was that the person would see that I was a good person who was really intentional, trying to do the right thing, that I had thought about the situation. I could take ownership of my mistakes. I wasn't just sweeping the situation under the rug without any self-awareness or accountability. And that's not what's been happening. Here's what I've come to realize. Over-explaining just makes people think that you're less knowledgeable. The over-explaining ends up coming off as excuse making or making justifications for your mistakes. I mind blown on this, okay? Also, as I very painfully discovered over the past few years in a particular situation that I've been processing in an ongoing basis, over-explaining sometimes meant that I would reveal information to people that they would then grab onto, take out of context, and use against me. So it was like, oh, I was trying to be transparent and vulnerable and reveal this thing. And instead of it being like, whoa, that's vulnerable, let's hold this with care. No, now it's being used against me in a really mean girls kind of way. I've also learned over-explaining overwhelms people or intimidates people or both. And unfortunately, most people who are overwhelmed or intimidated by over-explaining do not think to themselves, ooh, I'm sensing that I'm feeling overwhelmed and kind of intimidated right now. Maybe we should just slow this conversation down or da-da. No, they don't think that. They think, who is this asshole who's overwhelming me and intimidating me? And then they project onto you that you are the problem, completely missing the content of what you were saying. Now, maybe a lot of people listening to this are going, yeah, Kate, duh. But I truly did not understand that. To me, this was like, wow, big miss on my part. I'm thinking that all of my detailed explanations will be part of building a solution with someone to navigate conflict, and they're over there feeling overwhelmed or intimidated or both by what I'm saying and thinking that I'm saying so much because I'm trying to talk my way out of taking responsibility. Big miss. So may you learn from my pain, which is sometimes what I think my business model is. I'm laughing over here, all of you. That's the business model. You are learning from my mistakes, my fuck ups, my pain, my misses. So if you are the overachiever, I hope that this is helpful. Overachiever, listen to me. If you are the over-explainer, I hope that this is helpful to you in going, whoa, so that's what's been going on. And if you are on the other side of this, if you have someone in your life you've been in conflict with and you find yourself really irritated when they try to explain their perspective, I beg of you to consider the possibility that they are just making the same completely honest and unintentional mistake that I was making over and over for years. Maybe consider too that you're having something of a reaction to their over-explaining and then projecting and getting reactive, and that doesn't help. So basically, let's just get to the first things first for improving communication in relationships. This is for everyone. Don't over-explain. If you find that you are starting to over-explain, stop yourself and say, and I've been practicing this, you know what, actually, let me stop myself. I just realized I'm going into over-explaining and I'm talking a lot. Let me just close my eyes for a sec and think of what I'm really trying to say because I want to get to the point here. And I think that has been a successful strategy for me thus far. I think because it signals to the other person that I'm actually trying not to waste their time, that I'm self-aware enough to realize I'm over-explaining and it's not my intention and I'm trying to not waste their time. Or request that you pause the conversation and talk later. I'm going to talk about timing of conversations a little bit later. And then once you are going, okay, how do I get out of the over-explaining? I want to get to the point. How do I get to the point if I'm struggling to do that? Say what you need to say as kindly and directly as possible. And I have a resource for you. Kim Scott, author of the fantastic book Radical Candor talks about being both clear and kind in your communication. If you are not kind, you are what she calls obnoxiously aggressive. If you are not clear, then of course you are unclear. And the book focuses on workplace communication, but I promise, even in your personal life, it's a fantastic read that will help you to really say what you intend to say, kindly and clearly, and also without doing the thing where you end up not saying what you meant to say because you're so worried about what if I say it in a way that's unkind. So, helpful resource, Kim Scott, Radical Candor. Next thing for improving communication in relationships, check for understanding. There's so many things I'm grateful for in my marriage. One is that this checking for understanding was a communication habit that my husband and I learned early on in our relationship, way back when we were dating. To check for understanding basically sounds something like this. I say to my husband, I'm going to run to the store right before I do school pickup. And he says, okay, sounds good. Just so I'm clear, are you going to leave earlier than usual to go to the store and do a big grocery shop, or are you just picking up a couple things? Now, that might sound almost stupidly simple, but if you think about it, how many arguments get started in life because one person makes an assumption and the other person is upset like, hey, you made the assumption, you know? So in this example, like if one person assumes it's a quick grocery shopping thing, 5 minutes, run in the store, grab milk, come out, and then it turns out it's actually that longer grocery shop. Maybe this throws off dinner. Maybe this throws off leaving for some event. People are annoyed. And literally the whole thing could have been avoided with a quick clarification. At work, if someone's upset with you about a project and they're going like, you didn't, you blew me off when I tried to talk to you about these details and now it's coming back and it's biting us in the ass, You might say something like, okay. Let me just slow down a bit. So I'm hearing that you felt like I was being dismissive of your comments about the detail work when I was saying that we should just dive right in and try to get the basics outlined. Is that right? Like, just here's what I heard. Is that right? And the takeaway, if you aren't already practicing this in your life or with your teenager, with your partner, with your coworkers, the feeder sentences are, just so I'm clear, followed by sharing your understanding and asking if that's correct. Or let me recap to make sure I'm following. Sharing what you understand, ask if it's correct. Or I'm hearing you say that, share what you heard, check and see if it's correct. Quick warning about using those feeder sentences. And this ties in with the next point I'll make on improving communication. Take 100% responsibility for your tone and your energy. This is a big one, right? Because it's like, all right, first there's how do I communicate clearly and kindly? How do I not over-explain? How do I be direct? Then there's how do we make sure we understand each other, okay? And where things so often go off the rails is when people don't check their tone and their energy. You cannot say to someone, all right, well, just so that I'm clear, in that snotty tone of voice, and think that the other person is so stupid they aren't going to realize what you're really saying. The tone matters. I mean, come on, let's just be real. If you sound irritated, you will communicate your irritation far more than you will communicate your message. And I know that there are those who would say, don't tone police me. I have a right to my feelings. If I'm irritated, the other person should just be an adult and deal with it. Hey, if that's you, okay, you do you. I would just say, check in. Do you like being talked to in an irritated tone of voice yourself? Do you really think it's solution seeking for people to talk to each other in an irritated voice? Have you checked with the other person that they are okay with being spoken to in an irritated tone of voice? And if you've done all those check-ins and if you genuinely think it's working for you to speak to people in an irritated tone of voice and you don't want anyone to tone police you because you're finding that it's effective, okay, cool, keep on doing it, okay? But it's been my life experience that people don't like it. I mean, in a perfect world, you just talk to people however, and people would find some way to work it out. We don't live in a perfect world. People get really triggered, really upset. They feel disrespected. And I have to admit, in all transparency, that in another life, I was the person who thought that it was too constricting to monitor and take responsibility for my tone of voice. I felt like I was being policed or controlled if my tone was irritated and someone called me out on it and said, hey, don't talk to me like that. And I mean, to be honest, now I kind of look at that person 20 some odd years ago and I'm just like, whoa, that's like a level of entitlement. Like here I am, and I personally find that I don't like being spoken to that way, but why did I think I could dish it out to everybody else? I'm mind-blowing, okay? I personally have just found that if I'm using an irritated tone of voice, the conversation is just not as successful. So a question to ask ourselves is, when we feel entitled to use an irritated tone of voice with someone, am I trying to dump my irritation on someone, or am I trying to do what's actually successful for this conversation? And it's tricky because there are times where you might choose all the right words, and even when you're trying not to sound irritated, you still sound irritated. And I just think it's one of those times where we got to take 100% responsibility and go, okay, I can see how even if I was trying my best not to sound irritated, I still did. I just did. And I'm sorry about that. So sometimes that's a cleanup that people have to do. Now, next way to improve communication. Focus only on what you can control, which is your communication. Another tough one. I bring this one up particularly for times where there's conflict, and I just feel like anyone who's been in a relationship has probably had the conversation where you really truly are doing your best to say things clearly and kindly, and you would swear on your life that in fact you did say things that were clear and that were kind. You really had your side of the street clean. But the other person, maybe they were reactive, they were upset, they were clearly irritated with you despite your efforts. And you're trying to be magnanimous and gracious and just let it slide. And they keep being, well, a jerk. Parents of teenagers, I hear that this is a common scenario. And what can happen sometimes when that's going on is finally you'll be like, why am I trying so hard to be kind and solution seeking and work things out when all they're doing is dumping on me or giving me one-word answers to my questions? They're clearly not trying as hard as I am. They clearly suck. And now I'm going to let them know how awful they're being. So tempting, right? But again, this is another of those situations where you have to ask yourself, what am I about? Am I about, in this conversation, trying to work things out and communicate well? Or am I about dumping my feelings on them because now I have these feelings of frustration because I'm trying so hard and doing what I need to do to be kind and gracious, and they're not meeting me there. I'm mad. So even if your feelings of irritation are a reaction to how much of a jerk you think they're being, it still isn't going to get anyone anywhere. You got to focus on what you can control, which is your communication. That's the only thing you have control over. And when you look back on the situation, you probably don't want to cringe over something you said when you were angry. So keep that in mind as well. These days, if I'm in a dynamic like that with someone, and it happens, right? Like there are times, I've been on both sides. There are times where my husband is being a rock star with his communication, and I'm the one who's reactive. And there are times where I'm being a rock star with my communication, and he's the one being reactive. So what I've tried to do in those situations is saying something like, okay, I feel like we're about to get into an argument. Let's take a break. Let's try having this conversation in like 30 minutes. Can we just breathe and take 30 minutes and come back and talk about this again in like half an hour? Having a conversation later when tempers have cooled, that's a win. It gives everyone a chance to think through what they want to say. And I really like to, or I really try to add the time when I'll reach out again as helpful, just so that it's not a situation where there's any like sliding into a passive aggressive shunning or ghosting as a way to avoid the conversation entirely. And in fact, this timing thing, that's another communication tool. So allowing people, you and anyone else, time to think through what they want to say, that's gold. I think there's this pressure that we can sometimes put on ourselves to have the conversation and try to get it right in the moment without stopping to ask ourselves, is this actually the right time for this? And in particular with people who say things like, look, can I just tell you what I'm really thinking? It's like, oh, you know what's going to come after that is not going to be good. It's not going to be, it might be clear, but it ain't going to be kind. Or, something like, look, don't be offended, but nothing good happens after however that sentence ends. Timing matters. I once had someone say to me in a work context, look, I just want to be brutally honest with you, but I mean no offense by any of my comments. And before they could launch into anything, I actually said, well, actually, if you think your comments might come across as offensive or if the honesty is brutal, then I'd really prefer it if we held off on the conversation and talked about it after you've had some time to think through phrasing. I actually don't know how I found the wherewithal to say that in that moment. The person was very upset with me. What I knew about myself was that I was not going to sign myself up for someone to be quote unquote brutal in their feedback with me. And it seemed to me that they were almost trying to get my permission for them to just let me have it. Nope, permission not granted. It was just clearly not the right time for either of us to have the conversation. It also seemed as if they were trying to prime me or the situation in such a way that they should be able to say whatever they wanted, but the I don't mean any offense was this signal. Like if I felt offended by what they said, it was all on me since they didn't mean any offense. And technically true. If I'm offended, that's on me. That's another relationship tool I'll get to in a minute. But I certainly was not going to give someone just carte blanche to say offensive things with a caveat that exempted them from any accountability. The time for that conversation was a time when they were thoughtful with their phrasing and also when I would be more prepared for potentially difficult feedback. So it's really this timing, it's about two different sides, I guess you could say. In the delivery, thoughtfulness. In the receiving of feedback, priming yourself to really receive feedback, especially if you think the person is might not phrase it in the best way. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we try to communicate at times that are just not the best time. If you're already really irritated or sad about something totally unrelated and don't feel like you can trust that your emotions from the other situation won't leak into the conversation someone else is trying to get you to have now, hey, have the conversation at a different time. If you are exhausted after a long day, if you are hungry and need to eat dinner, if you're about to go to bed, those might not be the best times for conversations that are productive. Next communication tool, let's get into phrasing. Okay, phrasing. I'm going to talk about some phrasing that works and where people can sometimes go wrong with phrasing. I first want to clarify something about I statements. Those lovely I statements. I will also talk about some common words that almost always escalate conversations. But first, the I statements. You have probably heard before that using I statements in your communication helps you to take ownership and accountability for your words without putting them on others or blaming other people. And some examples of I statements might be, I feel upset right now. I'm not willing to do that. I like it when you're honest with me. You statements are more likely to trigger conflict. You upset me. You can't expect me to do that. You should be more honest with me. Most people have that part of the I statements and you statements down. They understand the difference. Where people get tripped up is when they turn an I statement into a you statement, which sounds something like this. I feel upset right now after seeing how little effort you put in. I'm not willing to do that after how dumb you were. I like it when you're honest with me, but it's rare that you ever bother to take the time. In those examples, the sentence started with I, but very clearly someone else is to blame. I feel upset right now after seeing how little effort you put in implies that the real problem is the other person's lack of effort. So there's blame in there, there's judgment in there, and that doesn't help the situation. So when using I statements, I'm clarifying here that if the I statement is turned into a you statement, you're not really using I statements. If you want to use I statements, just focus on the I part without the blame. I feel upset right now. Why do you feel upset right now? I'm holding a judgment that you didn't put as much effort in, and I need some time to sort through those feelings of judgment so that we can have a productive conversation. That is total ownership for how you feel and an identification that you realize that you feel a certain way, but you're not even putting the feeling on someone else. I'm holding the judgment. In reality, we don't really know how much effort someone did or did not put in. And 100%, I have been in conversations with my coach where I'm like, no, I really do know. They put in shit effort, like no effort, but you don't know really. That's the thing that they have always turned back to me, that I don't really know, that what's easy for me might be a ton of effort for them. The bare minimum from them, or what I judge as the bare minimum, might be a ton of effort for that person. And also, even if it really is true that they only put shit effort in, how does a tone of blame help the situation? If what I'm really after is that they would put more effort in, or my idea of more effort, or that I would get a certain outcome, doesn't help anything. So let's make sure that we touch on this. What do you need to do if you need to tell people about the impact of their behavior? Let's unpack that, because similar landmines are hidden in statements intended to communicate how you're responding to another person's behavior. And I'll give an example that I think is a hot button one. Saying to someone, when you lie to me, you make me feel betrayed. When you lie to me, you make me feel betrayed. So in that example, the person is intending to share their honest feelings. They feel betrayed, that are a response to someone else's behavior, being lied to. But the you make me part has taken the ownership of feelings and put the blame onto the other person. They make you feel a certain way, which they actually can't do. And I swear I've argued this one in sessions and finally realized people can't make you feel anything. Well, you want some proof of that? If you're like, yeah, they can. They can piss me off. They can annoy me. They can hurt me. They can do things that you might then, as a response, feel those feelings, but they can't make you feel anything. So here's the proof. I'm going to turn it around a little bit. I'm sitting here right now. I'm Kate. I don't know who's listening to this. I'd like to make you love me. Can I do that? Can I make you love me? No, I can't make a listener of my podcast love me. Well, then why would I be any more capable of controlling your emotions when it comes to anger? If I can't make you love me, why would I think that I can make you angry at me? And therefore, like, you're in charge of whether or not you love me. You're in charge also of whether or not you're angry at me. See how that works? So instead of seeing people as making us feel a certain way, we are more empowered when we decide, I'm the one in charge of my emotions. We decide whether we react by getting angry or respond by deciding that we don't want to allow someone else the control to disrupt our peace. And this is a big accountability thing for myself, and I will share it with you. It's something my coach, Matthew Marzell, has talked to me about more than once. Let's say that, who cares who makes it or doesn't or da-da-da-da-da, someone does something and I'm upset. Now it's my job to go do what I need to do to process out those emotions so that they aren't just hanging around in my psyche all the time, and so that I don't bring them into my next interaction with that person. So that might mean I go for a run. That might mean I slam around some barbells. That might mean I scream into a pillow. That might mean I talk to a trusted friend and say, okay, I want to put a container around this. Can I have 5 minutes to just vent? Whatever it is, it's our responsibility. We are the ones in charge of our emotions. We decide whether we react by getting angry or respond by deciding that we are just not going to allow someone else the control to be able to disrupt our peace. Now, I did give a pretty hot button example. When you lie to me, you make me feel betrayed. If someone's lying to you, if you have irrefutable proof that they are lying to you, I get why you'd think, what the hell do I care if they feel blamed? They are lying to me. They are to blame. They should know that. Gotcha. Roger that. I totally see what you're saying. And does phrasing it that way get you where you want to go? If you really wanted someone to see the impact of their lies on your relationship, is saying something that blames them and gets them defensive going to get you where you want to go, which is presumably that you'd like them to stop lying? So instead, I suggest something like this. I don't like being lied to, and right now I'm struggling to trust you because I feel betrayed based on past lies. That communicates the behavior you want to stop. It communicates how you feel. It communicates the reason why you're bringing it to the person's attention. I'm going to go to another example, one that I deal with more and more, and you could consider this with teenagers. I'm going to go to the example of kids who don't pick up their room. Instead of, your room is always a disaster zone, and I've asked you 100 times to clean it up. And when I have to keep asking you for that, it just really pisses me off and makes me so angry. You could say, I've been requesting that you keep your room clean, and I don't see that happening consistently unless I get really angry. And I don't want to get so angry. My baseline expectation is that your laundry is in the laundry room, the bed is made, and nothing is on the floor. If you aren't doing those 3 things consistently every week, I'm going to cancel your phone plan. Boom. Right there. With this, the attempt is to say, here's what I've been trying, hasn't been working. Here's what my specific expectations are. And here's what will happen if those expectations are not met. Now, since this is a parenting example, I just want to put it out there. I know that not everyone will agree with this approach. Some parents would consider what I just described as being too authoritarian. Speaking for myself, this is how I parent. I just see it as simple and direct because I do have an expectation that my daughter cleans her room. I want her to know that I don't expect that it's perfect, but I do have some baseline expectations that I want her to manage each day, and that if those expectations aren't met, there are consequences. And I'm a outline the consequences kind of parent because in my life experience, there are consequences, like in reality and day to day when people don't follow through on things. So I see it as my job as a parent to help my daughter understand that aspect of life and practice it, so to speak, through things like cleaning up her room. And I also just want to add that this anecdote is just a snippet of what that situation might look like. First of all, she does not have a phone. So there's that as well. There would be some other consequence that would be like, hey, you can't get onto devices, or, you're not going to be able to go to your friend's house or something like that. But this anecdote's just a snippet. I have also done things like sat beside her while she organized her things, or given her lists, or helped her with reminders, because she is still growing up. She's not going to suddenly know how to do this. She has gotten support around keeping her room clean for years now. I'm not just coming out of the gate expecting my daughter to automatically understand how to do these things. And I'm doing the best I can, and I've considered other approaches and tried other approaches, and that's just where I land. So I own that might be a different parenting approach than some people who listen to this podcast, and I think that that's okay. Speaking of other words, to clarify, because this I statement thing, I kind of went off on how we need to make sure we're really clear about I statements and not turning them into you statements. I just briefly want to add that the words always, never, and have to, when they are used in a negative context, almost always escalate difficult conversations. So if you tell someone in a negative context, you're always late, you never care what I think, why do I have to do what you say? Aside from those examples being you statements, the words always, never, and have to used in a negative context often escalate conflict. So try to eliminate those as much as possible. Next, to improve communication in relationships, don't avoid the communication. I promised I'd come back to that. And the reason that this is a tool to improve communication is that we get so busy thinking of communication as being about words, that we forget that when you don't respond to the emails or the texts, when they ask to hang out and you don't get back to them, when the person is doing those things and you are not responding, you are also communicating something, intentional or not. And what happens when there's no communication is this: people fill in the blanks with their own stories about what that means. I cannot tell you, anybody who's worked in corporate, you know what a disaster it is when leadership does not communicate clearly about what's going on. Rumors start back channeling the meeting after the meeting. Everybody's assuming this is what it means, stuff like that. People fill in the blanks. So back to like just everyday relationships, when people fill in the blanks with their own stories about what your lack of communication means, that's just likely to create more disconnection between you, which then is another hurdle to improving communication. So basically, I'm trying to say invest the time in communicating, don't avoid, because then you don't create this additional hurdle. So let me break this down. Let's say that you are not talking to someone because you're angry at them and you haven't told them that that's what's up. I've got some bad news for you. That is passive-aggressive behavior, and it's not emotionally mature behavior. It also might not get you what you want, because the other person might fill in the blank and really believe you when you claim that you're just busy. And then they wait for you to become unbusy. And maybe in the meantime, like you're even angrier. You're thinking about it more. You're ruminating, stuff like that. Some people move away as a passive-aggressive move, expecting that then the other person will chase after them. And then they're mad when they go no contact and the other person didn't chase after them and try to fix it. Usually that's predicated on the assumption they should know what they did, and so they should be approaching me and apologizing. Bottom line, no one gets anywhere. And really, the lack of communication, it's like, let's not play these high school games of passing someone in the hall and not saying hi, not sitting with them at lunch, right? Like we've all gotten out of high school, I hope. Just let the person know. And you don't have to over-explain. You don't have to get into a whole thing. I haven't been reaching out because I'm feeling upset right now, and I'm processing that. I'm going to reach out in a week to see if we might have a conversation. Is that something you're open to? So let people know. Let people know. Let people know. Other times you might not communicate. You might be avoiding communication in some way. Sometimes you might be unresponsive because you feel you need to reinforce a boundary that you've already verbally communicated, and the other person isn't honoring that boundary. Maybe they still call, they still drop by, they still send the text. In those situations, I suggest that you recommunicate the boundary again and say, I'm taking some space right now. But again, it's making sure that you're communicating the boundary verbally in the first place to avoid passive-aggressive behavior. And if you've already communicated a boundary and said you're taking some space and someone's not respecting that, Personally, I try to give someone the benefit of the doubt one time. Like, to them, taking space might mean we're not getting together for lunch, but I can still text. And so communicating that boundary in a way that is clear and kind ensures that everyone's on the same page, or as on the same page as you can be, and also means they don't fill in the blanks. And here's the last example about communication and making sure that if you want to improve communication in relationships, you don't avoid or miss communication. I want to speak into those times when someone is not very communicative, not because they are upset, but because they're just bad at returning phone calls or emails or texts. I know this might land for some people who fall into that category. And by the way, I would actually say I fall into this category. So this is something that I am working all the time on improving. When you don't communicate something, even if it's not personal and you're just not great at tracking and returning phone calls, emails, and texts, it communicates something. And what it mostly communicates is you don't want to put in the effort. I didn't realize this myself until I moved to a completely different state in the United States a few years ago. So I was in the position of making new friends and sometimes meeting someone at like a restaurant or at a park or whatever, and we exchange contact info. And then I'd text them and see if they wanted to get together or, continue the conversation we'd been having. And what I noticed is that if someone takes days to text me back, or if they forget to text me back, and then the next time I see them, they're like, oh yeah, I got to text you back. I don't think they're a bad person, but I am going to fill in the blank. And the blank I'm probably going to fill in is that based on their behavior, they aren't very interested in becoming friends or staying friends, or they'd put in more effort. And by effort, I don't mean that they have to like roll out a red carpet for me or invite me to their like family reunion or something. That would be so ridiculous. I'm just talking about like basic reciprocity, just basic reciprocity. And the thing is, once I was kind of on the more vulnerable end of things, trying to make new friends in a new city. And sometimes that would happen. It was super confusing because of course I don't want to be that person that the other person like sees my text coming in and doesn't respond and thinks to themselves, God, why can't Kate get the hint? It's like, I don't want to be that person. So I don't want to keep trying if they're trying to give me a hint and I'm not taking the hint. But then it would be very confusing because I would see them later and they'd be like, hey, how are you doing? Oh my God, you want to get together next week? Da, da, da. I find that so confusing. And what I've really just realized is that I've been in friendships before where someone wanted to be friends but didn't really initiate conversations, or they took a while to get back to me, or they only gave short responses when I would text them. And ultimately, what I've found personally is it just doesn't work for me. Like, we would get together and in person we'd be great, but then all the time in between, trying to even get a date on the books is like, a game of Tetris or something. And I would just get to the point where I was going, I am not feeling great. I feel like I'm project managing this relationship. I didn't think they were a bad person. I didn't think they were trying to do anything wrong. I just didn't like the feeling of being so responsible for keeping communication going between us. So this is a podcast all about improving communication in relationships. And part of the reason I'm touching on this in particular is that a lot of people are lonely. Like, it's all over the news. Like, loneliness is an epidemic. People talk about they want to make more friends. I can't tell you how many times it's happened where like this same thing plays out, where people just aren't very big on reciprocity. So here's the thing. You want to make more friends, you got to reciprocate. You got to be the one who reaches out and initiates the dinner plans sometimes. Or if you know that the person's getting a new job, you got to like ping them and go, hey, how's the new job going? Or maybe you just read a really cool book and you think they might like it too. Send them a photo of it or send them the Amazon listing or whatever. It doesn't have to be a lot, but a quick scroll through your text messages can probably show you how responsive you are. If you're not on your phone a lot, pick 15 minutes a day to respond to text messages. Put it on the calendar if you have to, whatever you're going to do. So if you want the connection badly enough, basically, you'll find a way to make the effort. All right, last one for today. If you don't, on how to improve communication in relationships, and it's this: if you don't want others to expect perfect communication from you, you can't expect it from them. So start each conversation anew. This is a big one I'm practicing. My coach, Matthew Marzell, said to me, how would you talk to them about this issue if it was the first time it ever happened? That's a great question. So it's like, if this thing that you've been trying to process with someone, if there's a conflict or a disagreement, if it was the first time that they ever did the annoying thing or the insensitive thing or whatever, how would you talk to them about it? Because what happens is we tend to expect perfect communication from other people. We don't always hold ourselves so accountable, but we tend to expect that from other people. But the reality is, people mess up. You might have a heated conversation with someone where they said the wrong things, you said the wrong things, and then the next time you try to talk, both of you are trying to go over all the wrong things that everybody said and did. And really that ends up just being about trying to prove your point that they did it wrong. And both parties are doing that to each other, and that's not helping you fix things in the here and now. Or sometimes people are holding on to things that someone said in another conversation where they might have, at that time, the other person might have been more reactive or might have had less information than they do now. And maybe everybody's still talking as if that's still the case. Sometimes we got to let things go. Sometimes we got to accept that that person did not handle things in the best way at that time. And we can't always expect, and sometimes we even have to accept for our own sanity, that we are not going to get the soul-searching apology for how they acted or what they said. You're learning from each interaction who this person is and how they're going to relate to you. And the reality is that no one on the planet is all good or all bad. I'm sitting here now talking about the things that I've learned based on the fact that I have fucked up. I have communicated in reactive ways that I regret. And depending on the person, sometimes I've found that even when I tried to clean that up, they were still sort of interacting with me as if I was the same person that made that same mistake 5 conversations ago. And if I don't like someone treating me that way, I have to be willing to not treat others that way. Usually, when someone is holding on to something that was said or done in the past, they're really not trying always to nail down what was said in the past. They actually are seeking resolution for some kind of hurt that they're feeling. So that's usually what's going on, and that's what I try to get to the heart of when I think that might be happening. So I said at the top of this podcast that today I'm referring to communication strategies for relationships where you both generally want to improve things and seek solutions. There are people who want to bring up what you did 5 conversations ago, not to resolve their feelings of being hurt, but because they want to use it as evidence to prove that how wrong you are, how much you suck, to generally just argue. And that is not effective. So be alert for which type of relationship you're working with if there are some unresolved feelings that someone's bringing up from the past, and just be aware, is this person bringing this up because they're still feeling hurt? They might just need me to actually voice that. I get it that what I said was hurtful, and then we're going to move forward? Or is this they want to bring it up because it's another, example that they've got on their tally mark sheet of how I fucked up and I'm so wrong and I'm so awful and here's the list of evidence that I'm bringing before the court. So know what you're working with. All right, I have covered a lot today, and certainly there's more that could be said about how to improve communication in relationships. I do want to make sure you have takeaways as you go into your next conversations with family or coworkers or your partner or whomever it is that you're communicating with. And so I'm going to recap some of the things that I went over today. First thing, don't over-explain. Clear and kind. Kind and clear. Next, check for understanding. When you hear someone say something, check that you understood what they were intending to communicate. Take 100% responsibility for your tone and energy. Don't pretend people can't tell. Focus only on your communication, which is what you can control, not policing or judging their communication. Allow yourself and others time to think through what they want to say and choose effective timing. Don't avoid communication because the avoidance does communicate something. And last, don't expect perfect communication from yourself or from others. Do your best, clean it up as you go. Try to treat each conversation as a fresh new opportunity. I hope that helps. All right, that's today's episode of the Your Courageous Life podcast. Thank you for listening. To dive in deeper and continue the work, head on over to yourcourageouslife.com. See you there.